Muy bienvenidos a todos. Yo soy Enrique Lamadrid, el profesor Lamadrid, y esta es la mesa redonda de Música del Corazón 7 del año 2020. So a big welcome to everybody. This is a discussion session, a round table, even though it's actually not round. But I'm very privileged to be here today with two people that I've known for a long time, and my goodness, one of them to my left, Marisol Encinas, is now executive director of the National Institute of Flamenco. She's a fourth generation flamenco dancer and one of the few American flamenco dancers raised in a flamenco family. Her grandmother, Clarita Garcia de Aranda, was her first teacher at age 5. Of course, her mom was at age before that, but a teacher cannot necessarily be your mom, right? She and her team, including her mother Eva and her brother Joaquin, organized the internationally renowned Festival Flamenco Albuquerque. She has taught with the National Institute of Flamenco since 1990, and in 2000 joined the UNM dance faculty. To my right is state historian Rob Martinez, a native New Mexican born and raised in Albuquerque with a guitar in his hand. He's a member of a multi-generational musical family, and their award-winning group, Los Reyes de Albuquerque, is renowned for New Mexicanizing the mariachi tradition. At UNM, he earned his MA in Latin American Studies with an emphasis in Spanish colonial history. He has a passion for making history come alive for high school students and now for the whole state of New Mexico as state historian since 2019. So welcome to the two of you. And our special theme this year, last year it was, we honored all of the teachers and field workers and people who have been out there for many, many years and several generations recording our folk music traditions. And some were from here, some were from other places, but without them, we would have lost a link to our musical past. And every year we have a theme. And this year, the theme is New Mexico's stepchildren. I like the word better in Spanish, hijastros, which is actually the name of our very own flamenco company. But these two traditions are exotic, I suppose you could say. They originally came from other places, from southern Spain, from central Mexico. But in the past century, they have really taken root here from mid-century, over the whole century, you could say, and they have naturalized themselves here. And you can talk about flamenco nuevo mexicano. You can talk about mariachi nuevo mexicano. You can define these things. And so the first question that we'd like to address to our guests is, how did mariachi and flamenco, how did these traditions become so popular so quickly in New Mexico, and what was the role of your own family in it? And we'll start with Marisol.
So talking about flamenco, why flamenco in New Mexico? And I have to, for my own experience, I have to give credit to my grandmother, and like you said, Enrique, she was my teacher at age 5, but it didn't mean that was when I started formally studying and having to take dance class, right? But music and dance was a part of my experience since before I was born. My grandmother, and who knows exactly how it happened, but my grandmother was a singer, dancer of flamenco, and flamenco of that period. So sometimes we think of flamenco or different art forms as they are today, as they have always been. And I think that especially flamenco has transformed. It's a transforming art form, just as any art form. It transforms with the interpreters. It transforms with the times and with the politics and with identity as that happens. And so flamenco, where there's always been kind of this, sometimes this kind of, I'll say conflict for lack of a better word maybe, of kind of Gitano Español, other dark blackness and darkness as opposed to whiteness and higher class, lower class, this kind of conflict that exists in the art form. Flamenco really is kind of a mestizo art form par excellence. It's an art form that is born out of mestizaje, born out of kind of rubbing together of different influences, whether it be influences from the Americas, influences from pre-Iberian cultures of, it develops in the 1800s in Spain in the 19th century, and then it becomes very popular outside of Spain almost immediately through its process. And that becomes, it becomes very popular in the United States. And I think that people, especially for us in the Southwest and people in New Mexico, this love of, and being able to identify with Spanish culture, and specifically with flamenco, in that it's kind of a song of the oppressed, an idea that is a celebration of survival and of otherness. And at any rate, my grandmother was a singer and dancer. She had a school in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in her house on Irete and Candelaria. Before that, her brother had a school on Lead and 2nd Street in Albuquerque at the turn of the century. And she performed with her cousins and with her brother. And they did Spanish dance. They did regional dances. She also did Mexican folk dance. She did Argentine tango. She did a bunch of different dance forms of the Spanish diaspora. And flamenco took root in my grandmother's lives and in our family. And what my brother and I began studying with my grandmother early on, formally in dance classes where we had to study. And I think that the other thing is, besides thinking of this art form as kind of a means of being able to kind of express yourself and identify, it's also just, as any art, takes a lifetime of study to even be mediocre at. And I think, the ideas from there, then we began studying, and it's taken over our lives, and that's what we dedicate our lives to.
Yes. No, great. Since I'm a professor at UNM, I often get calls from people, colleagues from other places. They say, well, why Albuquerque? Why flamenco? Are you guys into this kind of fantasy Spanish heritage? Are you Hispanophiles? They have all kinds of crazy theories being in other places. And I said, no, there is a very deep attachment to flamenco here that can, how do you explain it? This is not Andalusia, although some of our landscapes resemble Andalusia, except there's no olive trees here, obviously. But I think with all of the Hispano Nuevo Mexicano students in the dance program at UNM, there's something very deep that they identify with, maybe the subordination of that the Gitanos have faced in Spain. Their language has all but disappeared. There's some words in their own Romani language, which comes originally from India, that have survived. But just being in that kind of down position, Spain was a place that decided not to exterminate them. Spain has mixed feelings about them. They're very proud of flamenco. They have mixed feelings about the Gitanos, and so I think that the Chicanos from here, if I can use that word, have a lot in common with that social positioning, and they can feel the defiance that the Gitanos feel and put into their dance, and that's so much a part of the gestures and the energy of flamenco. So What about mariachi? What can you tell us about mariachi and your family, Rob?
Well, primeramente, hola Enrique, hola Marisol.
Hola, Rob. ¿Qué tal?
Qué gran placer estar aquí hoy con ustedes.
Sí.
Thank you for having me. I like what Marisol said. I was thinking about this, about mariachi. Flamenco comes from Andalusia, which is a mestizo culture. It's a mix of Spanish, Jewish, Muslim, Gitano, Gypsy. It's got that Mediterranean passion. And so when you get to Mexico, when you get to Mexico, over the centuries, what you have is this blending of all these cultures from Andalusia into Mesoamerica, the Mexican Indian cultures and civilizations. And it really mixes into this amazing music form in the 1800s, which is mariachi. It might even come from a French tradition, mariage, in the 1860s. But it comes from the rural areas of Mexico, especially Jalisco, and Morelia, places like that. And it's just a passionate musical form, art form that expresses the feelings of the pueblo, the gente, the people. It doesn't matter if it's a small town in Andalusia or a small town in Jalisco, Mexico. What you get is this amazing, passionate music. And when it comes up to New Mexico, it's brought up by people who are Spanish and also mestizo and also Mexican Indian. And so this culture is blending here with Pueblo people, the first New Mexicans, and then Genizaros. These are passionate people too. They have amazing expressions in dance and music and foodways. So it's no wonder that by the time you get to the 20th century, this is fertile ground for mariachi music, for the blending of these cultures, because even in mariachi you see that flamenco influence with the strumming of the guitars, the cante hondo, the singing, the very expressive singing of a malagueña or a ranchera, and you go, wow, that's Mexican, but you know what? It has a certain Andaluz flavor to it, a flamenco flavor. So I think we have to remember that New Mexico is also a mestizo culture. Mm-hmm. So, we have these roots in Spain, but they run deep through Mexico. And in Mexico, they're picking up native Mexican and African elements as well, because these are colonies. These are colonies of Spain. So while they are Spanish, they are not merely Spanish. Mm-hmm. Rather, they're part Spanish. And that goes for New Mexico, but it also goes for Mexico and Cuba, Puerto Rico, Peru, the Philippines, all of these places. We have Spain in common. So it's no wonder that you find flamenco, obviously it's mostly popular in Spain, but I was doing some research, and the second most popular place where they have academies is Japan. Mm-hmm. And Japan also produces amazing mariachis, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the third most popular place for flamenco academies is Mexico, Mexico. So Mexico has a strong flamenco tradition too. So it's not just coming from Spain here, it's coming from Mexico to New Mexico, and it's carrying that Mexican flair, and then it becomes something quite unique in New Mexico. And that goes for our mariachi style here, which clearly has roots in Mexico, Jalisco, but also in Chihuahua. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, it becomes something unique in New Mexico in the mid-1900s. So that's where my family and other New Mexican families start interacting a lot with immigrants from Mexico and músicos, musicians from Mexico, to create something different and unique, yet still in the style of mariachi.
Mm-hmm. I remember your father, who was a good friend to all of us, saying how exciting it was to be up in Mora, New Mexico, where there wasn't even electricity at the time. Yeah. They would start up a generator, they would get a sheet, they would take a projector, and they'd show Pedro Infante movies, these mariachi cowboy movies, and And he said all the guys gathered around, and the women as well, and they said, "This is great. We want more of this." And it really was a big thing for him. I remember in learning more and more and more about mariachi, we worked in Morelia, Michoacan, every summer for about 10 or 15 years with students. And that's one of the epicenters of mariachi culture. But you just make assumptions. You see the zapateado, the footwork, and the special shoes and the boots designed to make the audience feel and hear those rhythms. And you just assume that, well, this is the influence from southern Spain, could it be flamenco influence? Who knows what it is? And there's Mexicano archaeologists that have told us that in the Indian villages in Jalisco, and some of them in Michoacan, they had something called a foot drum. And it was a pit, it was a trench, and they found remains of like a big tabla, a big piece of flattened wood, and the pit underneath was the resonator for the zapateado. And you can still see this in places like Oaxaca, where they don't even use zapatos. It's just by the ocean, they turn over a canoe, and they even call that a tarima. They call it a tarima. And of course, flamencos use a wooden platform, and mariachi dancers, the dancers that dance to that music, use a wooden platform too, because you got to get those rhythms out there.
And zapateado, the act of doing footwork in flamenco, is right now, I mean, it's pretty widely accepted that zapateado is, first of all, I mean, all of the influences that take place when we're talking about, yes, Rob, I wanna say I agree with you 100%. The one thing about flamenco and mariachi is that it's popular dance. Mm-hmm. It's of the people. And that's why one of the things I feel like why it resonates with us as people that are de la tierra, people that are attached to the land and have a certain type of way of identifying. The other thing is that, like obviously trade routes, I mean, whether it be transatlantic trade route or slave trade, I mean, right now there's a lot of work that's being done in trying to reconcile and recognize the influence of African slaves in flamenco and African slaves in Mesoamerican culture in Mexico and all through here. Also, the Pacific trade route, as far as one of the reasons that there's a lot of work that talks about the kind of adoration of flamenco in Japan and in the Orient or in Asia is because of, like the influence of Asian culture in flamenco is very prominent as far as the Montón de Manila, the different ideas and cultural exchanging and rubbing together of ideas and music and fashion and clothing and all of these things. But in flamenco, right now, it's widely accepted that footwork is from the Americas.
Wow.
The act of footwork of zapateados is from the Americas. And then in flamenco history, as flamenco develops, the addition of more footwork was something that was thought of as darkening it. It made it less español and more gitano, more dark, más de la gente. So that was kind of a gitano contribution. Gitano kind of takes on the form of anything that is other. So anything that is like brown, anything that is of the people, anything that is from the Americas is considered negro, at that time more darkening, and then Spain is considered the other by all of Europe.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you should mention that because there is a saying in Europe for centuries that Africa begins at the Pyrenees, mm-hmm. that Spain was European, but it was also African. So that's always been even part of the Spanish tradition and perceptions. But, over the years, I've played with my father, Roberto Martinez, his group, Los Reyes Alburquerque, and we've shared the stage many times with your mom, with Eva, and it's quite fascinating because she'd get up there and just do an amazing show. Sometimes she'd go before us, and I was like, oh, man, we have to go after her because it was just, this passion. And we'd go up and we'd do our Nuevo Mexico mariachi songs, but you'd sit there watching her, and you'd go, this is New Mexican, this is Nuevo Mexicano. It's not merely Andaluz. It's not merely a Mexican thing. This is puro Nuevo Mexico. And it was just quite amazing how the two performances really fit well together. And the different Andalusian and Mexicano traditions really blend well in a New Mexico ambiente, atmosphere.
Yeah. I think I married my first husband because of Vicente Fernandez.
There you go.
So hello. I mean, the thing is, mariachi, I think that it's something, like a lot of times I feel there's this pull as far as like, okay, do you like mariachi? Do you like flamenco? What do you identify with? And I think everybody can, it's kind of like red chili, green chili. What do you identify with on that level? Pero they're part of, I think, our history, or at least some part of our DNA that we can kind of scratch back to.
Well, it's both. We can identify with all of these things. That's the beauty of Nuevo Mexico culture. Again, it's mestizo culture. We started out Pueblo, and we're still Puebloan. We still have Genizaros with us, and they're in us too. And then, we start out as settlers, colonists in the colonial period. We were part of colonial Mexico for over 200 years, but over 200 years of blending and interacting. In the 1800s, all of a sudden we go, wow, we're Mexicanos. We're Mexican. So I think that pull to Andalusia, to Spain is there, but it's also there in Mexico. That's why no matter what we call ourselves, Spanish, Mexican, Chicano, Latinx, Crypto Jew, Genizaro, we all love to get a tecate, eat some frijoles, chile with tortillas, and we all get a tear in our eye when somebody comes in and a mariachi and sings Volver, Volver, and we all fall in, it's just kind of what we're all about.
I mean, my family is Genizaro, my dad's family is Genizaro, my great-grandmother was Pueblo. I mean, it's like there's this it's much part of who we are and it's, and I think especially this day and age, studying your history and how you identify is so important in this period of time. Always, but like especially today, like, with BIPOC and Latinx and all the different terminology.
We should add a little bit. We should talk about Genizaros just for a second. They are the largest, they were and are the largest single ethnic group in Hispanic New Mexican society. These are people who descend from what were initially Indian slaves, and Vicente comes from a family like that. He comes from an Hispano-Comanche family. They have their own music, they have their own dance, and he's explored the music. Some of that music has lyrics that I've traced just for their political content. I've been able to trace them to the 1770s and 1780s, the conflicts, the war that was going on with the Comanches. And in recent projects, we've actually seen those lyrics in travelers' diaries as early as the 1830s. So this is not something they're making up. And those lyrics, Vicente asked himself the question, what is our deep song? What is our deep song? And he got inspired the other day, and he mixed in a bunch of them, and it really is becoming a trademark of Vicente Griego. Every cantaor, every singer, has one foot on tradition, one foot standing on tradition, and the other foot. What I admire about flamencos is that it's part tradition and part innovation, and that's his gift to cante flamenco is including his own Genizaro heritage in it, and it's quite an accomplishment, and that's why the transcription of those lyrics is so important. Flamenco singing is highly stylized. Sometimes it's got Romani words thrown in there. Caló is like the dialect of the Spanish gypsies. And so a lot of students, a lot of Spanish speakers have a hard time understanding what's being sung. And so that's why we're going to make an effort to transcribe everything that he sang that day and make it available. And because he's making flamenco history and taking off in this very, very New Mexico direction.
Enrique, well, the Genízaros themselves are an innovation in our history. Yeah. So, and they're in us too. You know, all of us Hispano Nuevo Mexicanos, we're showing our DNA is showing us to be about 30% Native American, and some of it's Mexican Indian, some of it's Pueblo, but it's also Genízaro. Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting listening to you how Vicente is innovating and changing. Well, all cultural forms and cultures in general, living cultures are always changing. They're always borrowing from other cultures they come into contact with. I mean, my dad, he was one of the first, at least locally, to put a woman in his mariachi. Angela Perez was a violin player back in the 80s when no one was doing that. Right. And then later on, we did a Beatles tribute with a mariachi, a full-on mariachi playing music by the Beatles. And some of this stuff, it steps out of tradition. And some people are going to go, well, that's not puro. That's not the pure tradition. And that's okay. But other people go, wow, that's great. A flamenco singer singing Genízaro, that's
and the question is because amazing. Like there's this whole idea is what is puro, and like the thing is what is considered puro was really never puro in the beginning. You know what I mean? And like I think there's a really good historian that I follow in flamenco, and he compares flamenco or any art form to energy. That like the idea of energy is not created or destroyed but transformed. And the idea is in that case, in that like flamenco at the same time it's not created or kind of destroyed by any sort of, but it transforms by interpreters and transforms with the rubbing. I love the idea of rubbing together, because I mean the thing is it's like the rubbing together of threes and twos in music to create son, the rubbing together of cultures to create a different type of music that is not a music that is created, but a music that is transformed by the rubbing together of different ideas.
Let's not forget rubbing together of people.
Yeah, and rubbing together of people and ideals. And the thing is, I think, in that, I would say the Genízaro too is, that's one of the things that, like you said, the deep song, the cante hondo of the people. The thing is, in Spain, there's all these Gitano groups that call themselves Cheroques, Comanches. They're tying on to the idea of being of indígenas. Yeah. And the thing is, like, indígena and indigenous identity. And for us, in New Mexico, the one thing that I say is, as you consider myself, I'm going to speak of myself included. I'm one of those people that's 30% Native American, as I dance flamenco. And so I realize, like, you have this thing, I'm dancing flamenco, and I'm indigenous in some part of me, from all different, I have indigenous blood from Haiti. Who knows what the heck who knows, maybe from Colón to Hispaniola. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's the idea of being able to be Mexicano, Español, Indígena, Native, Plains Indian, Mexican Indian, all of these things at the same time. And I feel like that's one of the things about these art forms, and not limiting art forms to one person or one place or one thing, but it being diasporic as it is.
It's amazing. What is, you could talk about what is the African influence in mariachi, and you'd have to go to the son itself, the main kind of musical form that you find in mariachi music, and you actually find it all over Latin America, and it's the basic ambiguity between twos and threes, and there's a kind of syncopation there that comes from Africa. That's the African part of, that's the African contribution to mariachi. And you'll know it's a son if some people are tapping their foot to the twos, and
Yeah.
other people can be tapping it to the threes. They're in 6/8. They're in these polyrhythms. It's really quite amazing. Rob, what about the signature song? There's a signature song that every mariachi group plays called La Negra. Anytime there's a set, it's always in the set. And we heard it, we're going to hear it in the concert itself. And what is it about La Negra? What is it about that caste term? Because it doesn't necessarily mean African. What is, if you call someone significant in your life, negrita or negrito?
Term of endearment.
Yeah.
My mom is very fair with hazel eyes, and my father used to call her Negra. That was his pet name for her.
Yeah.
And I think you're touching on something, Enrique. You mentioned the casta system, the caste system. That's who we were, and that's who we are. We were casta people. That means even the term Español, when I was first starting my studies, I used to think, well, Español meant you became European. It didn't. It meant you were of the Español casta, which meant you were still part Indian, but you were just at a higher designation in that very racialized and racist system of organizing humans into a category based on how you looked, how you dressed, what your skin color was. But a song like La Negra, you're right. There's something about that song that just kind of hits you in the gut. You know, when you first hear those first notes, and that rhythm starts very slow, and it speeds up, and it gets your blood going, you know. And I think it just speaks to something that's within us. It's within us. And when I say us, I don't want to just talk about people who are of Spanish, Mexican background. It doesn't matter what your background is. If you're from New Jersey or from Germany, it really is a human thing, I think. It's a human thing where everybody starts just getting going when you hear that, because that addressing, it's about a woman, of course, it's feminine, negra. It's saying that there's a prominence, obviously, for people in the casta system. Again, going back to what we were saying earlier, Marisol, it's music para la gente. It's the music of the people. It's music for everyone. It wasn't the music of the higher classes. I mean, we know that mariachi started in the countryside, and it was the farm workers. They would dress in their white cotton clothes and wear the huaraches with the big hats to keep the sun off their face. And so that became popular. But when Porfirio Diaz, around 1910, takes the mariachi out of the countryside and brings it to the big city, Mexico City, they dress up in the traje, the beautiful black outfits. And then the tradition of plata, I believe, comes from I've heard from the Mexican Revolution, when the revolutionaries would raid an hacienda and take the silver, and they'd put it on their clothes as a sign of victory. But, you know, even when I've worn a traje many times with the tight pants and the short jacket, and I'd look in the mirror, I'm like, this is cool. It looks kind of like a bullfighting traje de luz. You know, it looks kind of very similar. It's very sensual and very masculine, but we'll even see that changes later on as far as it being merely masculine, as far as mariachi.
Should we, maybe we should talk about the dark side a little bit. These two traditions particularly become symbols for those two nations, those two places. Spain, flamenco has become like a synonym for Spain, in the same way that mariachi becomes like an icon for all of Mexico. And some of this is through politics. I mean, you mentioned Porfirio Diaz. He brought him to Mexico City. Very quickly, they learned to dress him up like policemen. The rurales at the turn of the century had similar uniforms, and that thing of the plata goes all the way back to the war against Spain. too. It goes way back.
So it has like a
And
quasi-military
Yeah,
almost
yeah, it's-
symbolism in there.
if it's a person with an Indian face dressed in a uniform, you're going to have more respect, and it did get more respect from them. And so they were very prominent in the political campaigns of Lázaro Cárdenas, the president. He would bring him up from Michoacán, he'd dress him up, and he became very identified with it. And in Spain, the same thing. When the French invaded Spain and wanted everybody started eating French food and dressing French styles, and there are these people called the majos, los majos y las majas, that were just Spanish in your face. They were almost like pachucos, you could say, defiant and saying, we don't like your French politics. We are from here. And then the dark side even goes into the Franco years. Franco loved flamenco, but how did flamenco survive Franco? These are some
And
questions.
he loved a certain type of flamenco. And the other thing is, and it's his propaganda of España es diferente, as far as using it as a tool within a messaging tool, a message of propaganda within it. And I think that the crazy thing for me, what I always think in looking at flamenco specifically and its relationship to Spain is, my students right now, some of my students, if they go to Spain and they study and they go to Spain and they think that everybody in Spain loves flamenco. Well, the truth of the matter is most people in Spain don't like flamenco.
Yeah.
A lot of people in Spain don't like flamenco, and they see it as this kind of symbol, even with the Generación de 98, the Generación 98, the Generación 27 of García Lorca, and all these people kind of fighting for the identity of flamenco and flamenquismo and anti-flamenquismo, and as it being something that kind of, in the turn of the century, in the 20th century, the turn of the 20th century, there's this whole movement to do away with flamenco and do away with bullfighting and do away with anything that kind of represents the Spain of the past, except that then Franco goes in and says, no, this is the type of flamenco that we're going to use to represent ourselves in tourism in this kind of idea. And the crazy thing is that flamenco still to this day, it's used as a huge draw for tourism, and it's a huge marker of Spanish identity outside of Spain, yet it's not very appreciated within Spain. So there's that conflict as far as, it's a lot of times what we see, like even in the festival that we produce yearly, artists tell me every year, I wish that flamenco was this valued in Spain. Wow. As opposed to how it is valued and kind of presented outside of Spain. So, I mean, that's, I think that in Mexico, maybe mariachi is more, because there's more of an indigeno kind of identifying place of identifying people as mestizo and mariachi representing mestizaje in that way, in that culture, maybe it is more embraced.
Well, I mean, you can see signs. We've seen them in the books. They had them in Los Angeles, too. Los Angeles was a big center for mariachi, and it's the first place where women mariachis would sing. They didn't let them sing in Mexico. They sang in L.A. for the first time.
Yeah.
And all over Mexico, in some cantinas and some dance halls, they would say, there'd be these signs saying, no dogs, no mariachis. So it's there's similar, there's similar problems. But the great thing about both traditions is they are traditions of the people, and those letras, those lyrics that you find in flamenco, that you find in mariachi quite a bit. There's if it can't be open political protest, there are political messages in it. There's resistance. There's cultural resistance going on. I remember very well my first big exposure to cante, to the flamenco music. The song was in Spain in '74. Franco was still alive, and I was studying in Madrid, and my teacher Ángel González, the poet, said, Enrique, here's a long weekend. You get down to this place called Puebla de Casalla that has a famous cante festival, and you get down there and you listen to José Meneses. José Meneses was a kind of cantaor who would, he'd put political messages in his cante, and sometimes they were very anti-Franco, and he got arrested on many occasions. I don't know if he was ever jailed or anything, but the audience would just be waiting to see what he was going to try to slip in there. And the Guardia Civil, the guys in those three-cornered patent leather hats were just waiting for him to slip up and to arrest him. So that was Spain in the 70s. That was my first exposure to the cante hondo and everything it can mean as a form of cultural resistance. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it's been a really great session. If there's anything we can do to summarize, I haven't been watching my clock. I've just been listening to you guys and really enjoying this. And is there anything that you'd like to say in conclusion to this conversation?
What I would probably just bring about is like where we are right now, as far as, as you mentioned, we have a dance company by the name of Hijastros. We do a lot of different. We do a lot of work in flamenco and different things. We have a dance company, we have a festival, but near and dear to our heart is education. And I think that kind of is something that I got from my grandmother, my mother got from my grandmother. My grandmother's mantra was her motto was, perform in the community as much as you can, even if it means for free, all the time. Yeah. And give scholarships and just impact your community. And so I think that part of what, right now we have a bunch of kids that study with us. We continue to try and impact lives through arts education. And I think whether that be at the university, in public school, and in our company, now there's, like you said, we have our company Hijastros, Stepchildren, that is kind of 60% of those people in that company are New Mexicans. And one of the things that I would go back to is any art form, regardless of the art form, the genre, the vehicle that you choose takes a lifetime of study. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's your cross that you bear. And, there's I think that having this vehicle and opportunities for people to really be able to explore their vision as artists.
Great. Thank you so much. Rob?
Well, my family has a mariachi tradition because of my father, Roberto Martinez. As you said earlier, he fell in love with Pedro Infante, and he said, I'm going to do that. And my dad was a very determined person, and he did it. But he did it his own way. Most mariachis are very big groups. My father in the 60s started Los Reyes Albuquerque as a small 5-piece group. I think part of it was very shrewd. That way they get more money. If you have to divide it between 5 people instead of 10, you make more money. But it was a mariachi group that played norteña songs, and there's that political element in there with the corridos, and my father composed corridos about Daniel Fernandez and about the Tierra Maria courthouse raid. So he was always doing this. So we really, in my family, he brought us that tradition and legacy. And like you, Marisol, he always told us, we'd say, Dad, you could go out there and make a lot more money than you're making. He goes, Mijo, he'd say, this is a mission I'm on. I'm on a mission. I'm not doing this to make money. I'm doing this as a mission. It was like a vocation for him to sing corridos, to compose corridos, and to show us to be proud of our Mexican heritage here in New Mexico. We have a very strong Mexican heritage that we need to embrace and be proud of and share with the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
He really, that was his greatest gift maybe to New Mexico, that we're Mexicanos. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, out there in the community, when people are speaking Spanish, they'll identify still. I can picture my father-in-law right there. Somos mexicanos, los mexicanos de aquí. Mm-hmm. And as a professor, this was the perennial question of students kind of look, studying about their history and trying to get an idea of their identity. And I said, look, don't let anybody tell you who you are. Here is the toolkit. Study your history. And sure enough, by the time of the resettlement in New Mexico and the foundation of Santa Cruz de la Cañada de los Españoles Mexicanos.
Yep.
And so in 1693, people were calling themselves Spanish Mexicans.
Yes.
And they're Spanish, but the connection to Mexico is so strong. And I said, if that's what your ancestors called themselves in 1693, I'm not going to tell you what to call yourself, but just study your history and make sure you study all of it. And I want to thank Marisol and her company for making it okay to feel as Spanish as we are, and Rob and his family to make it okay to be as Mexican as we are, because we are truly Españoles Nuevo Mexicanos, Españoles Mexicanos aquí en nuestro bendito Nuevo México. Que viva Nuevo México.
Órale.
Órale.
Viva.